I'm going to preach on something a little different this morning. I want to talk about the timeline of Jacob's life. And I was recently going through the book of Genesis, and I wanted to look into this and see if I could figure out a lot of the events of Jacob's life and how old he was during them. Before I start, though, I'm going to give you a little quiz, just one question, just a show of hands. How many of you think that Jacob was a teenager when he got married? Anybody? How many of you think he was in his 20s when he got married? Okay. How many of you think he was in his 30s when he got married? Maybe. 40s? 50s? 60s? 70s? 80s, okay. 90s? Over 100. Okay. All right. So most of you are wrong, and the rest of you are cheaters. So you looked at the outline ahead of time, I assume. So Jacob was actually 84 when he got married. 84. But if you're like most people, you probably think that he got married and started a family as a young man, right? Before I started looking into this, I did too. Although I looked into this years ago, I couldn't remember, a long time ago, probably at least 10 or 15 years ago, as I was reading through Genesis, I was trying to figure out how old Jacob was when he got married and some things. And it took a lot of doing, as this whole outline basically is the explanation of that. And at the time, I remember learning that he was in his late 70s when he left to go find a wife. But I could never find any of those notes. I knew, like in the back of my mind, I always thought that. I may have even mentioned it, but I could never prove it again, and because I didn't have the notes. So anyway, as I was going through Genesis recently, I thought I'm gonna see if my old research was correct, if my memory serves me right. And so now I have it all. And I even made a timeline here. I emailed this to you as well. So this shows it to you graphically, and you can see all the events. But it takes some doing to figure all this out, because there are only 2 places in Scripture where Jacob's actual age is given. And so his age at marriage and many other significant events in his life can be found, but none of them are given explicitly. The only 2 things that are given explicitly as far as his age goes are when he arrived in Egypt and when he died. And that's it. Just 2 places that mention his age. But I have 13 significant events in his life that I can give you his precise age for by reasoning from the Scripture, from other things that are said. So the 2 places in Scripture that mention his age are, as I said, he was 130 years old when he arrived in Egypt. That's Genesis 47 and verse 9. Genesis 47 and verse 9. And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. Now he's speaking to Pharaoh right after he got to Egypt. So this is upon his arrival in Egypt. Joseph introduces him to the Pharaoh, and Jacob says that he's 130 years at this point. And he didn't have a whole lot of good things to say about his life up until this point. And he had not attained to the years of his fathers. His fathers actually lived a lot longer than he did, even though he lived to 147, which we see in Genesis 47 and verse 28. In Genesis 47:28. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. His father lived to be 180. His grandfather lived to be 175. Isaac was 180. Abraham was 175, if I remember right. So he didn't live to that age. So what we're going to do is we're going to work backwards and deduce his age as we go, because that's what you have to do. The only ages are given right at the end of his life, so we have to start at the end of his life. We have to work backwards and see each event in his life as we go backwards through his life and get the whole way to when he left for Padanaram to go find a wife. Now, I mentioned about, I think it was 3 weeks ago in a sermon, about how you approach the Bible when you study it. And if you approach it that it is the Word of God, that it is infallible, that it is perfect and right and true in its entirety, then you can learn a lot of things from the Bible than if you approached it like it was just another book, or maybe it has some errors in it, or maybe there are some little minor contradictions in it, not a big deal, but just some little things. If you approach it that way, you will end up, if you study it at all, you'll end up just throwing up your hands and saying, well, yeah, this is a bit of a contradiction, but it's not a big deal. It doesn't really affect the, the broader truth of the Bible, right? And you won't learn a lot of stuff. But if you approach it that it has no errors in it, you will learn all kinds of things. And I've experienced this different times in my life, and this was one of them. Because as I was going through this recently, and I was trying to figure out all the dates and times, and I came across something that appeared to be a contradiction. And if I remember right, it was Judah, and when he got married, he had children, and his one son was wicked, and the Lord killed him, and then Onan was supposed to raise up seed, and then the Lord killed him too. And I got thinking, I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, there's not enough time to fit all this in here, in this time period. But instead of saying, well, it's not perfect, yeah, whatever, I mean, it doesn't exactly fit, but no big deal. I just thought, no, it's right, it fits somehow. And I just kept digging and digging and digging, and I found it, and it all fits. And there's plenty of time in there. I'm not actually going to talk about that a whole lot, but that's just an example. If you approach the Bible that way, you'll learn a lot. And if you don't, you won't. So as we work backwards through this, one thing that I want you to be aware of is sometimes it can get a bit confusing, right? If you're trying to keep track of everything, if you're trying to do the math in your head, and you're trying to keep track of the previous point that was made, and we base the next point off the previous point, you can pretty easily get lost in this, and you can get confused. And then when you get confused, you don't hear anything else that's said, and you're just like, I can't keep this all straight in my mind. So what I recommend is just get the major points. Each point I'll say Jacob was this old when this happened. So get the major point. I'll give all the scripture, I'll give the proof, I'll give the reasoning. But if you start to lose me or something, and if it gets a little bit confusing, just stop. Take my word for it that he was this age at this time, and then go back with the outline later and prove it out meticulously and think it all through. I mean, if you find something that's wrong, let me know. But I think you'll find that everything I have in here is right, but sometimes it takes a little bit of thinking. And I've confused myself a couple of times, and I don't think like I used to. I just don't have the mental capacity that I used to for whatever reason. And especially in the evening, and I was reviewing my own outline, and I'm just like, I can't. I was trying to understand what I'd written, and I was just confusing myself. But then I finally got it. I'm like, okay, nope, that's right. So anyway, I just want to tell you that. Go back, look at the outline, prove it out if you need to. I don't want you to miss the forest for the trees, right? So don't get all wrapped up in everything and then miss the main point is his age at all these different times. And then I'm going to have a takeaway when we get to the end of this. All right, so anyway, without further ado. So we're working our way backwards. So you remember the famine in Egypt. Remember there was this famine for 7 years, and then there were 7 years of plenty, then 7 years of famine, and then Jacob and his family go down into Egypt and end up being there throughout the remainder of the famine. Well, this famine began when Jacob was 128 years old, and it ended when he was 135. Now we've already seen that Jacob arrived in Egypt at 130 years old. Genesis 47 and verse 9. I already read you that verse, where Jacob told Pharaoh he was 130. The famine started 2 years prior to Jacob arriving in Egypt. So Genesis 45 and verse 6. Now, I don't know, maybe all this will be extremely boring to some of you. It could be, and I won't hold it against you. I like dates and times, and myself, I tend to remember dates. I can any major event in my life, I can tell you the year it was, if not the exact day, but I can usually tell you years, where I was when this happened, where I was when that happened, and then I usually I can then base from that, I can figure out other dates of other events in other people's lives because I remember where I was at that time, and then, so I love this kind of stuff, but then again, this may not be your cup of tea. But if it's not, just, humor me. Genesis 45 and verse 6. This is Joseph speaking. These 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. So this is when his brethren get there into Egypt, and he says that the famine has already been going on 2 years. Okay, so it started 2 years prior to Jacob arriving in Egypt, and that puts Jacob at 128 when the famine began, because he was 130 when he got to Egypt, minus 2, which means he was 128 when the famine started. The famine ended 5 years after Jacob arrived in Egypt, which is what the verse just said there. There's 5 more years of the famine, and this puts Jacob at 135 years old at the end of the famine, because he was 130 when he got to Egypt, and there's 5 years left in the famine. So he's 135 when the famine ends. Now, the 7 years of plenty began when Jacob was 121. The famine began when Jacob was 128. I already proved that, right? So everything that I'm going to say from here on is based on what I've already said. So we establish one age, and then the next point is based on that age, and the next point is based on that age, and so on. All right, so the famine began when Jacob was 128. Already proved that. The 7 years of plenty immediately preceded the 7 years of famine. Genesis 41, 29 through 30. Genesis 41, 29 through 30. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. This is Joseph interpreting the dream to Pharaoh. There come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. Okay, so immediately preceding the famine was 7 years of plenty. Therefore, the 7 years of plenty began when Jacob was 121, because the famine started when he was 128, minus 7 is 121. Now, Joseph became prime minister of Egypt when Jacob was 121 as well. Joseph became prime minister immediately after interpreting Pharaoh's dream about the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. Genesis 41, 39 through 41, and then verses 46 through 47. So you remember the story. Joseph was called out of prison because he could interpret dreams. He tells Pharaoh his dream, and he tells him the interpretation of it here. Genesis 41 and verse 39. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And then down in verses 46 and 47. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. So Joseph, as soon as he interprets this dream, he immediately becomes prime minister, and the 7 years of plenty start immediately at that time. So therefore, the 7 years of plenty, they began when Jacob was 121. We already saw that, and therefore Joseph became prime minister when Jacob was 121. Okay? Now Joseph was 30 years old when Jacob was 131. Joseph was 30 when he became prime minister. Did you notice that there in verse 46? And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Okay, so Joseph was 30 when he becomes prime minister, and Jacob, we've already seen, was 121 when Joseph became prime minister. Therefore, Joseph was 30 when Jacob was 121. We'll prove this another one. We'll get later on in the outline, and we'll be able to prove this another way, and you'll see the exact same numbers. Then Isaac died, this is Jacob's father, when Jacob was 120. Okay? Genesis 35 and verse 28. We're stepping back further in time. Genesis 35 and verse 28. And the days of Isaac were 180 years. So Isaac died at 180 years old. And Isaac was 60 when he begat Jacob. That's in Genesis 25 and verse 26. Genesis 25, 26. And after that came his brother out, And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel. This is Jacob's hand coming out of the womb. And his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. So when Jacob and Esau, the twins, were born, Isaac was 60 years old, 80 years old. So therefore, Jacob was 120 when Isaac died, because Isaac died at 180, and he was 60 years older than Jacob. So Jacob was 120 when his father Isaac died. So this was just 1 year prior to Joseph becoming prime minister of Egypt. So Isaac would not have known about Joseph becoming prime minister of Egypt. As far as Isaac would have known, Joseph was dead, right? Isaac thought his grandson was dead, had been dead for a long time. He never did get to learn about him becoming prime minister of Egypt. Now Joseph was put in prison when Jacob was 119, so 1 year prior to Isaac dying. It could have been a few more years earlier than that. It was at 119 would have been the oldest Jacob would have been. Because Joseph was put in prison 2 years or possibly a little while longer than that prior to being made prime minister. I got a bunch of verses here to connect together. Genesis 39 and verse 20. So he was in prison at least 2 years. He could have been in prison for more than 2 years. It just depends. I don't think you can't nail this one down perfectly. Genesis 39 and verse 20. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. This is after Potiphar's wife accused him of trying to seduce her. Then in then the next chapter, Genesis 40 verses 1 through 4, it says, And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. So when Joseph is in prison, then the butler and the baker get put in prison as well. We don't know exactly how long Joseph was in prison at this point. Could have been a short time, could have been several years, because he got sold into slavery when he was, I'm getting ahead of myself, he got sold into slavery when he was 17, and he became prime minister at 30, so there was 13 years there. So he could have been in prison for a number of years, but it was at least 2 anyway, which we'll see here in just a second. Genesis 40, 20 through 23. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. You remember they both had dreams, and Joseph interpreted them, and he said, you're going to be released and you're going to be hanged. And then that ended up happening. Then in the next chapter, Genesis 41, verses 1, 14, and then 37 through 41. Genesis 41, verse 1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. So now we know it's been at least 2 years. We don't know how long the butler and the baker were in prison exactly. We don't know how long exactly Joseph was in prison before them. So could have been longer, but it's at least 2 years. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. And then in verses 37 through 41, it says, The thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Who can find such a one as this is a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. Okay. So this would have put Jacob at 119 years old, approximately when this happened. Because Joseph became prime minister when Jacob was 121, we've already seen that from the previous point. Thus, Jacob was 119 when Joseph was put into prison, 121 minus 2. Or he could have been a little younger than that, depending on how long Joseph was in prison. All right, now, moving back, Joseph was sold into slavery when Jacob was 108. Joseph was 30 when he became prime minister. We've already seen that from Genesis 41 and verse 46. It says, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, right? So he's 30 when he becomes prime minister. And Joseph was sold into slavery when he was 17. Let's go back to Genesis 37, verses 2 and 28. Genesis 37, 2 and 28. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. So he's 17 when this happens, and we know what happens. He finds his brethren in the field. They decide they're going to kill him, and then Judah, I think it was Judah, talks him, or Reuben, one of them, talks them out of it, and then they throw him in a pit. And then before Judah knew what was what was going on, they ended up selling him to the Ishmaelites and being taken down into Egypt. Verse 28, and there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. So this happened when he was 17. Thus, it was 13 years from the time that Joseph was sold until the time he became prime minister. 30 minus 17 is 13. So 13 years transpired there. Joseph became prime minister of Egypt when Jacob was 121. We've already proven that. Therefore, Jacob was 108 when Joseph was sold into slavery. 121 minus 13 is 108. Now, Judah married Shua and begat at about the same time Joseph was sold into slavery. And we see this from Genesis 38, 1 through 3. And it came to pass at that time that Judah, this is Joseph's brother, Jacob's other son, one of his 12 sons. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren, and this is, at that time, right? So this is the time, right, when Joseph was sold into slavery. At that same time, Judah goes down, right? Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went in unto her, and she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name So Judah would have been about 20 years old at this time. And I'll prove that to you later. There were 3 years between Joseph and Judah. Judah was about 3 years older than Joseph. I'll prove that, like I said, later. So Judah would have been about 20 years old at this time when that happened. Now, backing up a little further, Joseph was born when Jacob was 91. Joseph was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery. We already saw that from Genesis 37 and verse 2. Jacob was 108 when Joseph was sold into slavery. I already proved that previously. Thus, Jacob was 91 when Joseph was born. 108 minus 17 is 91. Now, as a second proof of this, you remember in math how you could do a problem 2 or 3 different ways. You always get the same answer. You can go at it, different ways, right? Here's an example of that. As a second proof, Jacob was 121 when Joseph was 30, which we've already seen before, and therefore Jacob was 91 when Joseph was born. 121 minus 30 is 91. So 2 different proofs of Jacob being 91 when Joseph was born. That's how you prove your math problems, right? You do a math problem, you get the answer, and then you go about it a different way. You reverse engineer it, and you see if the answer is actually correct, right? So this is a way of proving the dates here. All right, now we're actually going to go forward in time just a little bit, and then we're going to continue going back in time. Okay, so we're going to go forward in time a few years. Jacob left Laban to go back to his homeland when he was 97. So you remember he went to Laban. He ends up getting himself a couple of wives there and a bunch of kids, and he works for Laban for a while, and then he goes back to his homeland eventually. All right, well, I'll talk about that here in a minute. Well, Jacob left Laban to go back to his homeland when he was 97 years old. Jacob departed from Laban with his whole family, with all his wives and his children. At that point, he had quite a little band. And he departs from Laban with his family after having served him for 20 years. He served him for 14 years for his wives and 6 years for his cattle. Let's look at Genesis 31, 17 through 18. Genesis 31, 17 through 18. Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting. I like that how it says that, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Padanaram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And then verse 41. So Jacob packs everything up, puts his family on camels, and he starts to head out. He's going back home. Verse 41. Now, remember, Laban finds out that Jacob had left, and Laban liked Jacob around because Jacob made Laban very prosperous, and he didn't want him to leave. And he was upset that he took off and didn't even tell him. So Laban chases after him and catches up to him, and then they get into a little fight. I mean, a verbal exchange, anyway. And Jacob was pretty mad at him, rightly so. And then here's what he says. Here's what Jacob says. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Okay? 14 years he served for the women, 6 years for the cattle. So Jacob's 14 years of service for his wives ended at the birth of Joseph. We'll see this in Genesis 30, 23 through 26. Genesis 30, 23 through 26. Let's just back up to verse 22. And God remembered Rachel, because she hadn't had any children yet. Leah was popping them out left and right. Leah had 6 of them, and then the handmaids had a few, and Rachel didn't have any. And it says, and God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and opened her womb. And she conceived, and bare a son, and said, God hath taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, and said, The Lord shall add to me another son. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go unto mine own place, to my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service, which I have done thee. So, obviously, his service was over. His 14 years had just expired. He had served 7 years, and then got tricked and had to serve another 7 years. Served 14 years, and that's when Joseph was born. So when Joseph was born, the 14 years were up. That was right at the end of the 14 years that he'd served, and he's like, all right, let me go, I'm out of here. I've served you long enough. So Jacob therefore served Laban for 6 years after Joseph was born. Remember, because he served him 20 years, he served him 14 for the wives, 6 years for the cattle. Joseph was born at the end of the 14th year, so therefore he served Laban for 6 years after Joseph was born. Joseph was born at year 14. He served for 20. So he served for 6 more years. 20 minus 14 is 6. Jacob was 91 when Joseph was born. We already proved that previously. Therefore, Jacob was 97 when he left Laban to go back to his homeland. Right? 91 when Joseph was born. He served 6 more years. He's 97 years old. Now here's something that I didn't have in the outline, but I just thought about. In Genesis 32, you remember the story when Jacob wrestled with God, saw God face to face, wrestled all night with God? This is on his way home. The man was 97 years old when he wrestled all night with God. I mean, that's a miracle in and of itself. I mean, just that he was alive. I mean, that's a miracle. But people did live a little longer back then. But 97 years old. I couldn't wrestle for more than 30 seconds, and I'd be completely wiped out and have to just lay around for the next day and not be able to do anything. Jacob wrestled all night long with God and prevailed. And then the Lord touched the hollow of his thigh, and he halted for the rest of his life. And I got to thinking, well, no wonder he got hurt. I mean, the dude's 97 years old, and he's wrestling around. Of course he's going to get hurt, right? I mean, who couldn't get hurt if you're 97? I mean, most people can't even walk when they're 97 if they're even alive. So yeah, when you think about some of these stories, you don't think about Jacob being this old 97-year-old codger wrestling with God all night long, right? But here he is, I was going to say octogenarian. I don't even know what a 90-year-old's called. But anyway, old as dirt. So then, now I said we jump forward a little bit in time. Now we're going to keep going back in time. And then we get to when Jacob married Leah and Rachel. He was 84 when he married Leah and Rachel. So Jacob served Laban for 7 years for Rachel, but he got Leah instead. Genesis 29, 20 through 26. Laban pulled the old switcheroo on him. And Jacob did not verify his purchase before accepting it. Pretty weird. Genesis 29, 20 through 26. He was probably just so darn excited, though. I mean, you waited 84 years for this, right? You don't even bother to check out her face, make sure she's the right one, right? Genesis 29, 20 through 26. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. And Jacob said unto Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. I just had another thought. You know why the 7 years seemed like nothing to him? He's 84 years old. Time flies when you're 84. I mean, 7 years is like nothing. It's like 7 days when you're a kid, right? Of course it didn't seem like anything. He probably couldn't even remember when he got there. I mean, it'd been so, he's... Verse 21, Jacob said unto Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place, and made a feast. And it came to pass in the morning that he took Leah his daughter, and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for a handmaid. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, What is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? You know when you get older and at night you can't see as well, right? Old people don't like to drive at night because they can't see, right? Poor old Jacob is 84. I mean, maybe he did take a look. He just couldn't figure out who she even was because he's so old. He's got cataracts by that point. So yeah, Laban pulls the old switcheroo on him and gave him Leah instead of Rachel. And Laban said, It must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. So after a week-long honeymoon, they didn't really call it that in those days, but that's basically what it was. After a week-long honeymoon, then with Leah, then the stipulation was he would get Rachel if he served another 7 years. So he needed to finish Leah's honeymoon and then serve another 7 years, and he would give him Rachel up front. Right? So the first one he had to work ahead of time, and then the second one he's like, well, you can take her now, but you got to work. You got to work her off, for the next 7 years. Verses 27 through 30. Fulfill her week. This is the week of marriage, the honeymoon, essentially. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel, his daughter, to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. So he got Rachel, like I said, same time he got Leah, a week apart, and then he served 7 more years for Rachel. Jacob was a lot more mellow than I would have been. I'd be like, nope, I already served 7 years. I'm taking both of them, and I'm out of here. And if you got a problem with it, you're a lot older. I mean, I'm 84, but you're probably 100 and something. So, let's go, and we'll see who wins, and I'm out of here. But, whatever. To each his own. So Leah and Rachel became Jacob's wives at the same time, a week apart, after his first 7 years of service. Now Joseph was born at the end of the 14 years that Jacob served Laban for Rachel. Remember, I already proved that, right? So Joseph is born at the end of the 14 years, okay? Jacob married Joseph's mother Rachel 7 years prior to Joseph's birth, because Joseph's birth took place at the end of the 14 total years. So here Joseph's born at the end of 14 years. Well, he married Rachel 7 years prior to that. Okay? He married Rachel after 7 years of service, and then he served another 7 years. And then after that 7 years, Joseph was born. So Jacob was 91 when Joseph was born. We've already proven that. So therefore, Jacob was 84 when he married Rachel and Leah. 91 when Joseph was born minus another 7 years is 84. Now, Reuben was born when Jacob was approximately 85. He was conceived soon after Jacob married Leah. Genesis 29:31 through 32. And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, Surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Okay, so I assume this happened right away, right? So Reuben was born right away, so Jacob would have been approximately 85. Because he got married at 84, and then Reuben would have been born about a year, 9 months after he was conceived, so probably, a year. So therefore Jacob was about 85 when Reuben was born, 84 minus 1. And then Judah was born when Jacob was approximately 88. Reuben was born when Jacob was approximately 85. Just saw that. Simeon and Levi were born of Leah after Reuben. This is in verses 33 and 34 of Genesis 29. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, Because the Lord hath heard that I was hated, he hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, Now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Levi. So after Reuben, she has Simeon and Levi, and they were in succession. They weren't twins or anything like that. So this would have taken at least 2 years. And then Judah was born after Levi, which would be at least 1 more year, verse 35. And she conceived again and bare a son, and she said, Now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and left bearing. So therefore Jacob would have likely been about 88 when Judah was born. 85 plus 2 plus 1 is 88. Okay, he was 85 when Reuben was born, and then add 2 more years for Simeon and Levi, and then add another year for Judah, so 88. And then backing it up even further, Jacob would have been 77 when he arrived in Padanaram at the house of Laban to find a wife. Now let's turn to Genesis 28. Genesis 28, 1 through 2. We see that Jacob left for Padanaram to find a wife among the daughters of his uncle Laban. Genesis 28, verses 1 through 2. And Isaac called Jacob, and blessed him, and charged him, and said unto him, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padanaram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, and take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. So he's sent off to Padanaram, and upon arriving at Laban's house, Jacob makes a deal with him to serve him for 7 years for Rachel. Genesis 29 and verses 15 through 18. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. Now, I've mentioned this before, but it makes more sense now. If he says, what do you give me for Rachel? He says, I'll serve you 7 years. Why in the world would you pick such a large amount of time? Why wouldn't you say 7 months or 7 days or something, Why would you pick 7 years? That's a long time, right? But the guy's 84 or 77 years old, right? I mean, he's already losing it. So he says, 7 years, And I mean, if I was 77 and wanting to get married, I certainly wouldn't say 7 years. I mean, I'm thinking I'm going to be dead here in about 7 minutes. Let's get the show on the road. I mean, 7 years. This shows you when you get old and elderly, make sure you seek counsel before making important decisions, because, sometimes you make some screwy ones. But anyway. So after 7 years, Jacob married both Leah and Rachel at the same time. We've already seen that. And Jacob married Leah and Rachel when he was 84. We've already proven that. Therefore, Jacob was 77 when he left home to go to Laban to find a wife. 84 minus 7 is 77. 77 years old. That's really amazing if you think about it. I think if I were 77, I'd just say, I'm probably just going to stick around here and be a bachelor. I got a few years left at most. I'm probably not going to go to another country and go to all the work of getting a wife. I've done that once in my life in my 30s, went to another country to get a wife and all that. I am not going to do it again at 77. I can guarantee you that. I'd just say, I'm probably just going to stay at home and be single at that point. But anyway, Jacob was an ambitious guy, and he had lots of good life and vigor left in him, obviously. So, I want to give you some takeaways now, and I thought that this was interesting. I actually added this in later. The outline just ended here, and then I thought, actually, there's some practical takeaways that we could learn from this, so it's not just all theoretical genealogy stuff. The first takeaway is that God will be with you, and He'll take care of you in old age. Let's look at Isaiah 46 and verse 4. Isaiah 46 and verse 4. The Lord says, Even to your old age I am He, and even to the hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear, even I will carry, and will deliver you. So even to the hoar hairs, that's your white hair. So when you get old and white haired, God will still take care of you. Just like He did to Jacob. There he is, 77 years old, and maybe thinking like a lot of us would, you know what, my life is probably just about over, right? My best days are probably behind me. And yet the Lord took care of him for many, many years after that. Took care of him all through his old age. The whole way to go into Padanaram, to getting himself a wife, working all those years for his wives, and then working for the cattle, and he blessed them with multitudes of cattle and all this wealth and riches, and then taking his whole family back home and meeting Esau and along the way, and all those things, the Lord took care of him in all of his old age. And then when he gets back home, then there's this terrible famine in the land, and then he takes care of him through the famine, and he takes him to Egypt, and he gives him a place where he's provided for and taken care of in his old age. The Lord took care of him all the way through, right to the end of his life, even through seemingly impossible circumstances. The second takeaway is that God can use you to be His servant even in your old age. Psalm 71, 15 through 18. Psalm 71, 15 through 18. Psalm. I was looking at the wrong chapter. Psalm 71, 15 through 18. My mouth shall show forth thy righteousness and thy salvation all the day, for I know not the numbers thereof. And I will go in the strength of the Lord God. I will make mention of thy righteousness, even of thine only. O God, thou hast taught me from my youth, and hitherto have I declared thy wondrous works. Now also when I am old and gray-headed, O God, forsake me not, until I have showed thy strength unto this generation, and thy power to every one that is to come. And that's one of the best things that old people can do. When you get old, you can't do a whole lot. You get to the point where you can't do much physical work anymore. You can't, there's many things that you can't do, but you know what you can do? You can show God's strength to the next generation. You can pass down the faith to the next generation. You can tell your posterity how God took care of you and provided for you. You can teach them the truth of the Scripture. And you can also teach them by your example. As you're hobbling in with your little cane, all hunched over into church every Sunday, you can teach them by your example that, even when I'm old, I'm going to go and be in the house of God. And that's what it says in Psalm 92 in verses 13 through 14. Psalm 92, 13 through 14. Those that be planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing. But that's how you bring forth fruit, if you're planted in the house of the Lord. If you're not planted in the house of the Lord, you're not going to bring forth fruit. Right? If you take a plant and it's not planted in the earth, it's not going to bring forth fruit. You got to be planted in the house of the Lord. That's where you're going to bring forth the fruit. Takeaway number 3 is that God will give you strength to meet the challenges that you will face all your days, just like he did with Jacob. And getting back to actually the previous point there, before I go to this one, you remember what Jacob said in Genesis 28? I just thought of this. Genesis 28. Remember the old-aged ones will be bringing forth fruit in old age when they're in the house of God? Genesis 28 and verse 16. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid, and said, How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob arose up early in the morning, and took the stone that he had put for his pillows, and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of the place Bethel, which means house of God. But the name of the city was called Luz at the first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, I will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace. Then shall the Lord be my God, and this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee. So Jacob says this place is the house of God. He names it Bethel, which means house of God. And he says that this pillar shall be God's house. What's the house of God? What's the church called in the New Testament? The house of God, the pillar and ground of the truth. All right, so Jacob is in God's house bringing forth fruit in his old age. All right, now to the next point that I had started to go to before I jump back to that one, is in Deuteronomy 33 and verse 25. That God will give you strength to meet the challenges you face throughout all your days. Deuteronomy 33 and verse 25. Let's just back up a little bit. We'll just go to verse 24. And of Asher he said, Let Asher be blessed with children, let him be acceptable to his brethren, and let him dip his foot in oil. Thy shoes shall be iron and brass, and as thy days, so shall thy strength be. As thy days, so shall thy strength be. So in other words, however many days you have, God will give you strength to get through those days. Another takeaway, practical one, is that you're never too old to get married. Jacob was 84 years old before he got married. So, if you haven't been married yet, later on in life, you can still marry. I've known people that have married well into their 70s at least. Some people for a second time, some people for a first time. I know of a number of people that have married for the first time in their 70s, and maybe there's even some in their 80s, who knows. But anyway, you're never too old to get married. You just wait on the Lord and see what He provides. And you might have children a lot later in life than you planned. Right? Jacob was 85 when he had kids. He was having kids in his 80s and 90s. Now, that's not going to happen these days. Well, for a man, I suppose. That could happen for a man. For a woman, it's not going to happen these days. But for a man, I wouldn't want to do it. But there have been men, in modern times that have had sired children into their 80s and maybe even later. There was just recently, I think, the grandson of one of the early U.S. presidents just died. And I'm talking just within the last couple of years, I think. Just a few years ago, this man was still alive. The grandson, I forget which president it was, going way back, one of the presidents you never heard of, way back into the 1800s. And what happened was, as happened a lot of times in those days, is the man, married young, had a bunch of kids. His wife dies.